Going back to the tumultuous 1960s in the Indochina Peninsula, suppose you're an American soldier captured by the Vietnamese army, what would you choose? To submit to the enemy for slightly better treatment, or to uphold the honor of a soldier, even if it may mean enduring torture? This is a dilemma that every captured American soldier might face. However, there was one soldier who neither surrendered nor suffered too much, and in the end, he successfully rescued over 200 comrades. You might be wondering, how did he do it? The answer might surprise you. His secret was pretending to be an idiot. Let's get to know the protagonist of this story, Doug Hegdal. He was born on September 3, 1946, in South Dakota. In his youth, he was just a typical country boy, rarely venturing far from home. By his own account, the farthest places he had been were his uncle's house in Minnesota and his aunt's house in Arizona. However, after graduating from high school, he wanted to see more of the world, so when he heard the call to enlist in the U.S. Navy, he decided to join. For Doug, joining the Navy seemed like a perfect decision, as it meant he could sail around the world with the fleet. He even fantasized about possibly getting a free trip to Australia. At that time, many young people probably thought that joining the U.S. Navy was the best way to fulfill their dreams of global travel. After training, Hegdal was assigned to the U.S. cruiser Canberra. Seeing that the ship's name was the same as an Australian city, he excitedly thought that his trip to Australia would soon come true. However, to the contrary, with the full outbreak of the Vietnam War, the Canberra was dispatched to the waters off North Vietnam. Soon, his travel dreams were shattered, replaced by an exciting battlefield life surrounded by gunfire and bullets. On the early morning of April 6, 1967, the Canberra was shelling enemy targets along the Vietnamese coast. As the battle began, the roar of the cannons woke up Hegdal, who was sleeping in the lower cabin. In a semi-conscious state, he walked up to the upper deck. Unfortunately, the blast from the cannons swept across the entire deck, causing him to fall off the ship. Fortunately, 12 hours later, after drifting for a long time, Hegdal was rescued by a North Vietnamese fishing boat passing by. When they reached the shore, a group of angry Vietnamese fishermen tied him up and handed him over to the North Vietnamese forces. The interrogation began, and during the process, Hegdal discovered that the Vietnamese interrogators had a lot of information about the U.S. military. This made him realize that he could be seen as a source of intelligence. To escape the interrogation and torture of the Vietnamese, after careful consideration, Hegdal decided to adopt a strategy, playing dumb. After being captured, despite wearing a prisoner's uniform, Hegdal's ordinary rural appearance deceived the Vietnamese intelligence officers. He took advantage of this and began his performance. He told them that he was a poor farmer from South Dakota, and his family didn't even have a cow. His southern accent and ordinary appearance made his performance seem more real. When asked about any military-related questions, he always answered that he didn't know because he was uneducated and illiterate. Eventually, this caused the Vietnamese interrogators to lose hope, and they gave up attempts to extract information from Hegdal. The Vietnamese were still on guard. In the POW camp, some intelligence personnel abandoned the brutal interrogation methods and adopted a friendly attitude to get closer to the prisoners of war. They casually chatted with American soldiers, occasionally asking a question, "What do you desire most in this world?" The vast majority would answer directly, "I want to go home." But when this question was asked to Hegdal, his eyes twinkled, and he smiled, saying, reporting, "Sir, I want a pillow." In the POW camp, everyone lay directly on the cold, hard cement floor, and only a truly naive person would give such an answer. However, the persistent Vietnamese did not give up on extracting more information from Hegdal. To create propaganda materials, the North Vietnamese interrogators asked Hegdal to write an anti-war statement by hand to express his disgust for the war. Hegdal gladly agreed, which made the North Vietnamese interrogators very happy, as no American POW had been willing to do this before. But when they brought pen and paper to Hegdal, he pretended to be very confused and said, "I'm a countryman, illiterate, can someone teach me how to write?" To meet Hegdal's needs, the North Vietnamese interrogators sent a fluent English instructor to teach him how to write the statement. But this English teacher was driven to distraction by Hegdal. Hegdal deliberately showed his farmer identity, pretending he couldn't learn, which infuriated the teacher. After several attempts, the teacher completely gave up and gave Hegdal a nickname, the Real Fool. After a series of twists and turns, Hegdal was transferred to the infamous Hanoi POW camp, known as the Hanoi Hilton. There, Hegdal fortuitously met a Navy pilot named Joe Krecka. This smart pilot had invented an efficient memory technique that could quickly memorize the detailed information of 256 pilots in the POW camp. His wish was for every prisoner of war to remember this information so that they could provide this crucial intelligence upon returning to the United States. After interacting with Hegdal, Krecka quickly saw through his disguise and shared this memory method with him, embedding all the pilots' names into the nursery rhyme "Old MacDonald Had a Farm." Hegdal's days in the Hanoi Hilton were relatively relaxed. The Vietnamese had no idea that a seemingly slow countryman could cause them any trouble. As a result, he was assigned to sweep the camp, and the guards were hardly vigilant towards him. In this way, Hegdal, broom in hand and singing that song, freely moved around every corner of the camp each day. Although Hegdal appeared simple and foolish to many, in reality, he was always up to mischief when the North Vietnamese guards weren't paying attention. Colonel Stratton, who shared a cell with him, recalled, while the Vietnamese were wholly convinced that Hegdal was an utter fool, they gave him a unique task: to clean the camp every midday. At first, I didn't pay much attention to his behavior, thinking it was just a chance to take a midday rest. But later, I became curious about what Hegdal was up to outside. One noon, I peeked through the cell's observation hole, astonished to see him stealthily opening the fuel cap of a North Vietnamese truck and dumping the swept trash into it. I witnessed him doing this to at least 5 trucks. Once these debris got into the truck's fuel pumps, their engines would surely be damaged. I'm an experienced carrier pilot with numerous achievements, yet I've never successfully sabotaged a North Vietnamese truck. In contrast, Hegdal was clearly superior to me, managing to destroy 5 enemy trucks while being a POW. By 1969, as U.S.-Vietnam relations began to thaw, both countries opted for peace negotiations. Before the talks began, North Vietnam decided to release 3 American POWs as a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps they no longer wanted to deal with a troublemaker like Hegdal, so he was chosen as one of them. For the pilots in the Hanoi POW camp, Hegdal's release was significant. His brain held the memories of all the names of the pilots confined in the Hanoi POW camp. Once the U.S. government had the detailed list of confined pilots, they would employ various means to exert pressure on the North Vietnamese government to ensure all detainees could safely return home. On August 5, 1969, the released Hegdal embarked on his journey back to the United States. After leaving the Hanoi Hilton, this incredibly stupid man no longer had to play dumb in front of others. As soon as the plane landed, Hegdal found officials of the U.S. government and recited "Old MacDonald Had a Farm" in front of them. The information provided by Hegdal caught the attention of the U.S. government, and he was quickly appointed as a representative to participate in the Paris peace negotiations. During the negotiations, when the North Vietnamese representatives claimed that the conditions in the POW camps were good and insisted that there was no mistreatment of prisoners, Hegdal decisively retorted, "I've been there, I know exactly what happened inside." Faced with Hegdal's firm response, the North Vietnamese representatives who recognized him were left speechless, and they never mentioned the "good conditions" or "no mistreatment" again. Ultimately, thanks to Hegdal's efforts, all 256 American pilots detained in the Hanoi Hilton were safely released. These pilots never imagined that this incredibly stupid man in the POW camp would turn out to be the hero who saved all their lives. After the peace talks concluded, Hegdal was appointed as an instructor at a U.S. Navy training school, where survival, evasion, resistance, and escape skills were taught. Using his own experiences, he taught the new generation of servicemen how to protect themselves in crises. After retiring, he chose to spend his later years in Ocean Beach, San Francisco. Hegdal's story tells us that sometimes, wisdom and strategy can be more effective than direct resistance. Even in the most difficult circumstances, a person's clever choices and determined resolve can create unexpected miracles. Of course, this story has many coincidental factors, which is why it has become a legendary tale. Do not attempt to replicate it lightly. On real battlefields, enemies have no patience to waste time with a fool. A single shot might be all it takes, and the game would be over.